sometimes controversial, always politically incorrect, and pro-life without exception, without compromise, and without apology. It's the Pro-Life America podcast with your hosts, Sarah Waits and the president of Life Dynamics, Mark Crutcher.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. As you heard, I'm Mark Crutcher and joined by my worthy co-host, Sarah Waits.
Hello, everyone. Well, Mark, I was on Twitter and, I got my fill in about 10 minutes today.
I would imagine you would.
There was a general hand-wringing about Roe versus Wade. And Vogue, the hard-hitting journalism of Vogue.
Oh yeah, Vogue magazine. It's my Bible. I mean,
it constantly is just bringing me these earth-shattering articles, such as Jennifer Lawrence wears summer's most divisive shoe. And I always loved a loafer, Kendall Jenner, on 10 things she is buying for fall. My personal favorite, I'm transfixed by Kim Kardashian's gas station looks.
Yeah, there's nothing more demeaning to women than women's magazines. I mean, it's
all about a certain set of fashion, certain clothes, certain looks, certain body types, yeah. I
remember one of them, and I'm going to get into all the gory details, but one of them, a headline on this Cosmo or Vogue or one of these nonsensical things was, how to get the man that doesn't want you. And I'm thinking,
wow.
Is there anything more demeaning than that?
Why would you go after somebody who clearly doesn't value you and appreciate you for who you are?
Or just doesn't even want you?
Yeah. So why are you chasing after somebody who can't appreciate you?
I don't know. I don't understand it.
That's crazy.
But anyway.
So Vogue has a new article in their hard-hitting journalism. The title of this article is Jennifer Lawrence Talks Motherhood, Causeway, and the End of Roe versus Wade. Because I want to know what her opinion on Roe versus Wade is. Well, first off,
you got to tell me who Jennifer, what's her name?
Lawrence.
Jennifer Lawrence. You got to tell me who this chick is, because I've never heard of her.
I guarantee you've probably seen her. She's a young actress. She's actually about my age. She's been in a number of movies. Probably the most popular things that she's been in, besides Silver Linings Playbook, is she was in The Hunger Games. She was the chick who played Katniss Everdeen, and she was also in
and I have no idea
the X-Men movie playing.
I don't watch that drivel, so I can't tell you.
Well, she's been in a number of movies. I'm sure that if I showed you a picture of her, you would recognize her.
So she's your typical Hollywood starlet.
Yeah, she's your typical millennial starlet. The interesting thing about Lawrence is that she grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and when she was growing up, she thought of herself as Republican. And then over time, her positions changed. And, of course, in this article, she waxed poetic about the wage gap, guns, the EPA, all of that stuff. But she talks about in this article her strained relationship with her relatives. And the article says much of her disappointment was directed at certain relatives back in Louisville where she'd grown up, including her father. The 2016 election had torn a rift in her family. She even discussed with her therapist the recurring nightmares she has about Tucker Carlson.
She has nightmares about Tucker Carlson.
Yes.
This is not one of your intellectual giants here.
She says, it breaks my heart because America had a choice between a woman and a dangerous, dangerous jar of mayonnaise. And they were like, well, we can't have a woman. Let's go with a jar of mayonnaise.
She's talking about the 2016 election where Trump was elected.
She's talking about Trump versus Clinton and that Trump is a jar of mayonnaise, whatever that means.
Whatever that means.
And the only reason why people didn't vote for Hillary Clinton had to been because of what was between her legs.
Right.
I'm sure that there was a small segment that may have been what it was about, but for the vast amount of people, it's really insulting for them to say to people like me that you just didn't vote for her because she's a woman.
Well, let me tell you this. The part of that story that never gets told.
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you that we don't have any proof of this, but if you set out, you'd find it. For every person that voted against Hillary Clinton because she was a woman, 10 people voted for her because she was a woman.
Oh, absolutely.
There's no doubt about that.
I remember at the time, there were feminists out there who were telling women in my age group, we need to vote with our vaginas, whatever that means.
Right.
And that we need to vote for her because she's a woman. Just because she's a woman and just because I may want a woman president doesn't mean I'm going to vote for the first woman that walks by.
Whatever nitwit what comes up. Anyway, setting aside this bubblehead from Hollywood, setting aside that, this is a legitimate issue in families all over the country. Back when I was doing seminars and speeches a lot and doing pro-life banquets, if I took questions and answers, if I took more than 2 or 3 questions from the audience, One of them would be about somebody's broken relationship with a parent or a sister or a brother or best friend. You know, I've had people say, I went to elementary school with my best friend and we've been best friends since day one. She's like a sister to me. Now we can't speak.
Yeah.
Because she's pro-abortion and I'm pro-life.
And we had an episode dedicated to this issue. I'll put the link in the description, talking about the prevalence of how much that's gotten worse in recent years, like since the 2016 election specifically and forward.
Well, first off, there is a scriptural reference for this. God told us, Jesus told us, that our enemies, and he didn't say our opponents, our enemies would be members of our own family. That he did not come to bring unity, but a sword. And we were going to be separated from people based on whether we followed him or not. And this is a good example of it. And what I've always told people is that when you become pro-life, there are prices you have to pay. There's a price for everything you do in life.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's a very high price. It might be that you're estranged from a family member. I know that I am. It might be that you lose all your friends. That's happened with me. Years and years ago, I had lots of friends. Nowadays, as you know, I have one or two, and that's it.
And it doesn't even necessarily have to be abortion. I mean,
nowadays, if you just say you voted for Trump, that will isolate you from large segments of people.
People who called Trump jars of mayonnaise.
Right. Yeah, well, obviously she's not very tightly wrapped. But the point I want to make here, and that I was thinking about when you brought this up, and what I used to tell people when I was out doing speeches, this is just one of those prices you have to pay. And so you have to decide whether following Christ and doing what he wants you to do as it regards the abortion issue, if the price of that is losing a relationship, are you willing to pay that price? And remember, we've always heard when you follow Christ, you have to pick up your cross. This is an example of that. This is part of picking up your cross. I mean, I've seen divorces happen.
Yeah.
I've seen people lose careers, lose jobs, like I said, lose relationships with people that they care about. And it can be heartbreaking for people. But again, are you willing to pick up your cross? That's the question.
With everything that's happened with Roe recently, all this kind of stuff is going to increase. So you're going to see people have this kind of feelings. It's going to get worse.
Right.
And when this interviewer was going back for part 2 of the interview at her house, apparently she said that she was in a mood that day, one brought on by overturning Roe apparently just a few days prior. And she says, I remember thinking a million times about it when I was pregnant, thinking about the things that were happening to my body. And I had a great pregnancy. I had a very fortunate pregnancy, but every single second of my life was different. And it occurred to me sometimes, what if I was forced to do this? And she talks about her family again, and she's like, how can you raise a daughter from birth and believe that she doesn't deserve equality? How? As if killing your children somehow equates equality for women.
Let me tell you, any man that you feel like you want to be equal to because he supports the right to someone to kill their child, that's a guy that's not worth being equal to. And the argument that I would make is that making abortion illegal is what makes you equal to men.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because men don't have that right to kill that baby.
We don't celebrate men walking away from their responsibilities.
No.
We don't chalk that up to freedom and empowerment.
Right.
However, when a woman decides to have an abortion, somehow that's
equality.
A beacon of equality.
Yeah. What people need to understand is the abortion lobby took over the women's movement. That was not always about killing your baby. That was not always the cornerstone of women's rights. The abortion lobby saw an opportunity, and they capitalized on basically what was gullible women to be sucked into this.
Yeah, we had an episode on this. It was a really good episode. I'll put the link to in the description. But basically, it fractured the women's movement.
Oh, yeah, it did.
When this embracing of abortion happened.
Well, the early feminists were all rabidly pro-life and hardcore against the legalization of abortion. And you can see when you have someone like this, some self-absorbed actress, how she would be gullible enough to be sucked into this.
I mean, she just kind of regurgitates all of the talking points. She talks about a conservative minority could take away that which the majority believed in, that kind of thing. And she even goes into the argument of how can male politicians weigh in on what is a female issue?
I thought we were supposed to be beyond the time when there was female issues and male issues.
Yeah.
I thought we were beyond that point. And
I thought you weren't supposed to assume someone's gender these days either.
Right.
How does she know that these quote, quote, male talking heads and politicians are actually identify as male.
Yeah, right.
She could have just misgendered them.
Yeah, right. I mean, I heard somebody the other day, and this is really true, say, we now look back in history when you say, oh, that happened during the Bronze Age, and this happened during the Iron Age, and this happened during this age or that. Someday people are going to look back and say, this happened during the stupid age, because the stuff that's going on nowadays is so abysmally stupid.
All of this ignores the fact that abortion is not just a women's issue, it's a human rights issue.
Yep.
You're talking about it is okay to kill a segment of the population based on the whims, wants, and desires of the other parts of the population, that they're not entitled to rights.
We'll decide what rights they have.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, how is that not a human rights issue? How is that solely a women's right issue?
Yep. Anyway, you had another inquiry from one of our listeners.
Yes, we have a listener question from Alex, and I apologize, Alex, because I'm going to butcher your last name. I'm just going to apologize ahead of time. Alex Tisrikos, and he asks, how can we use the ongoing issue of partial birth abortion to hammer away at the abortion industry? Today, if you do a partial birth abortion where abortion is legal up to birth, you get 2 years in prison. He goes on to say, we should advocate for 20 years. While I guarantee this wouldn't save one baby, the arguments in Congress and the images it'll create will prove to everyone that this is an ongoing issue, thereby hurting the abortion industry and moving the needle in our favor.
Well, on one hand, I see what he's saying. Mm-hmm. And I remember back when the partial birth abortion debate was going on several years ago. I was making the argument. I wrote articles about it, and we talked about it on Live Talk. Mm-hmm. What you have to understand is that it will not save one single baby.
Yeah.
You can outlaw partial birth abortion, and you could even have a way to enforce it, which there is no enforcement mechanism for it. It can't be enforced.
Okay.
Well, who's going to be the one to enforce it? All the people that are involved in it are breaking the law, and they're not going to rat out each other.
You don't think it's possible to get clinic workers or somebody else to turn on them?
It'd be a long shot. And you still have a very difficult time proving it. It'll just be he said, she said. But the fact is, let's say that George Tiller was doing partial birth abortions. Mm-hmm. And let's say that somebody broke into his room while he was fixing to do one and said, Dr. Tiller, wait a minute. The Supreme Court just outlawed partial birth abortion. If you do that, you're going to go to jail for murder. Is he going to not do that abortion? He's still going to do it. He'll just do it using a D&E or whatever, a saline, whatever. Mm-hmm. The abortion's still going to happen. You can't just outlaw a method. Mm-hmm. The abortion's still going to take place. But in defense of the partial birth abortion argument, or the fight against it, it does create a nightmare for the other side to have to defend it. Mm-hmm. Because they know that you start talking about pulling the baby feet first out of a woman and sticking a pair of Metzenbaum scissors into the base of a skull, and the baby jumps when you do that. When you start talking about all that, and then they have to defend that, it did move the needle. It's
hard, yeah.
It moved the needle toward the pro-life position.
Well, didn't they at first try to claim that partial birth abortion was not a thing?
They first claimed that it was almost never done. And then they had one abortion clinic owner, I can't remember who it was, I think they were in New Jersey, said, well, I've done 5,000 of them, or that our clinic has done 5,000 of them.
Wow.
And then so all of a sudden that got blown out of the water. And so you had several people, I think Ron Fitzsimmons from the National Coalition of Abortion Providers came out and said, we're lying about this, that it is commonly done. So that kind of went away. And actually that particular issue kind of turned the media against the abortion industry for a while, because you have to understand the American media is made up of pathological liars. Mm-hmm. And they are fully fine with lying to people.
But they don't like people lying to them.
But they don't like being lied to. And they went out here and carried the water for the abortion industry and said, oh, this is almost never done. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden to have the abortion industry have to fess up and say, oh, no, we do a lot of them. Caused the media to, just for an hour or two, they kind of turned against them. But pretty soon they were back on the reservation. But the danger here is, when you start talking about late-term abortions, or in this case, a particular procedure in a late-term abortion, in a kind of strange way, you are reinforcing an argument that the pro-aborts make, which is that the baby's not the same early in the pregnancy as it is late in the pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And that there is a distinction between them. There's not.
As if the early abortions are not anywhere near as bad or grotesque as the later ones, simply just by the mechanics of how they're done.
Well, and they're not as barbaric. And it's kind of implies that
there's a difference between the two.
By the time that the baby is, say, 24 weeks or 28 weeks, that it's a human being.
Something miraculous has happened.
But at 10 weeks, it's not. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of reinforcing that argument. If you're more outraged or incensed by a partial birth abortion than you are a D&C at 8 weeks or 9 weeks.
Well, I kind of think that even with pro-lifers, there's that tendency to separate the partial birth abortion versus the D&C or the D&E or the suction curettage or all the other procedures that they have, because they see the baby body with the snipped spinal cord.
Well, not only that, but historically, there has always been this tendency of human beings to be more outraged by the killing of other human beings who look more like them. For example, in ancient Rome, if you murdered a child, the punishment that you got for that was greater the older the child got. So if you murdered a 2-week-old baby, that wasn't as bad as murdering a 2-year-old baby, which wasn't as bad as murdering a 6-year-old child.
Interesting.
Because as they get older, they look more and more like us. For some reason, it's what I think is a dark side of human nature. We are more upset about things the closer the people that they happen to look like us. And that's one of the problems that the pro-life movement has. When you look at, let's say, a 10-week unborn baby, you can tell that's a living human being.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But they don't look like me and you. But we get more upset about it the further they go down the trail. And the more they look like us, we get more and more upset about it. And that's what we have to fight against. And one of the things that I always told people back in the days of the battle over partial birth abortion was, when you bring this up, when you talk about the abortion industry doing this, make sure that you preface it by saying that a partial birth abortion or a late-term abortion is no less barbaric or no more morally indefensible than an 8-week abortion or a 6-week abortion. Either we believe that human life begins at the moment of fertilization, or we don't.
Yeah.
And if we do, then we can't make distinctions between an abortion that happens at 8 weeks or one that happens at 28 weeks.
Well, if we accept that there's a distinction, then we've partially accepted the pro-choice position, because the pro-choicers are always like, well, we don't know when life begins. You have to have a concrete point of when life begins. Otherwise, it's entirely subjective.
Well, first off, if you don't know when life begins, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Life begins at the moment of fertilization. If for no other reason, then that's the only time it can begin.
At that point, it changes from just sperm and egg to an entirely new life, which continues to grow and develop from that point.
Right.
So you can't just say, oh, well, it wasn't alive before it had a heartbeat, because in order for something to grow, it has to be alive.
Right.
If it was not alive before, it couldn't develop the heart and the lungs.
I used to make that argument in debates with the pro-aborts. I said, you agree that an unborn, I'll call it an unborn baby, you can call it an obligate parasite or whatever you want to call it.
The trendy term of the day.
Yeah, the term du jour that makes you feel better about killing it. But you agree that the unborn at 28 weeks is larger than the unborn at 8 weeks. You do acknowledge that, right?
They would have to.
Yeah. Hence, you can look at a woman who's 28 weeks pregnant and you can tell she's pregnant. You can look at a woman that's 8 weeks pregnant and she probably doesn't even know.
Yeah.
So you agree that it's bigger. If it's bigger, how did it get bigger if it's not alive?
Exactly.
How did it get bigger? But then again, they claim to be the science party.
The science party.
And we're the gibbering idiots. But anyway, the interesting thing this kind of suggests is something that I've been calling for a long time. And it's what the Supreme Court has basically done in the Dobbs decision is they've said, we are no longer going to dictate abortion policy. Abortion policy will now be determined by the state legislature.
Because they're the only ones who currently have laws on abortion, and technically, according to the Constitution, falls to the states.
Right. That's the 10th Amendment. Now, that means that our ability to influence public opinion is now more important than it's ever been. And we're putting together, as you know, a training seminar on video that we'll be releasing very shortly that deals with that particular issue. But one of the things that we have got to do as a movement, this is not optional. We have to do this. We have to change how we determine whether someone is pro-life or not. You know, we've had this long history of political candidates coming to us and saying that they're pro-life.
Yeah.
And we support them because they say they're pro-life. They get into office and then they vote pro-abortion. This has happened to us 10 million times. as I've often said, we've been stabbed in the back more often by pro-life Republicans than we've been stabbed in the chest by pro-abortion Democrats. And part of the reason for this is because we're asking these politicians the wrong question. The issue, and I know this is going to sound weird coming from me of all people, the issue is not abortion. We need to stop asking these people, what is your position on abortion? The question we need to be asking them is, what is your position on the unborn child?
Yeah.
Is the unborn child, from the moment of fertilization, a living human being entitled to all the other rights of every other living human being?
It's a very simple question, and it takes out the people who are like, well, I think abortion is horrible, but I personally feel it should be legal. Yeah, and abortion is a tragedy, and no one loves abortion. All that claptrap takes it out, and it forces them to answer the most basic question, which is, do you support and are you going to fight for rights for the unborn? That's
From the moment of fertilization, in all circumstances, with no exceptions, no compromises. Is that your position? Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah.
And what you're going to see is a lot of times they're going to say, well, now this is the person who 5 minutes ago was telling you how pro-life they are. Well, I don't know if I would take it that far. Well, that's what being pro-life means. Being pro-life means you think that the unborn child at the moment of fertilization is the same moral entity that a 5-year-old or a 50-year-old are.
Well, and I think you can follow up with, if you don't think it's good to protect all children legally.
Which other groups?
Yeah, which children do you think should be protected and which children do you think should not be protected?
Right. But we've got to get away from this, letting them give us their position on abortion, because when they give us their position on abortion, we let them off the hook.
Yeah.
That's their way out. And so we got to tell them, I don't care what you think about abortion.
I don't care about you feel.
I don't care what your feelings are, what your beliefs are. I have no interest in any of that. What I want to know is, from you, is the unborn child a living human being from the moment of fertilization in all circumstances and entitled to the same rights to life as every other living human being?
And is every action that you take in office going to reflect that?
Going to reflect that view. That's what we've got to start asking. If we don't, we're going to continue to be deceived, and we're going to continue to be surprised when all of a sudden a guy that is hardcore pro-life, and I have been in environments where that's happened. I remember this happening one time when I was working in Louisiana on legislation down there with Woody Jenkins. We're waiting on a vote to stop abortion, and people that the pro-life side wasn't even bothering to talk to because they were solidly on our side. All of a sudden now, we just got word so-and-so changed his mind and he's voting pro-choice. Why'd that happen?
We also got to get out people, too, who prove that they're not really pro-life, because if we continue to vote for these people and continue to elect them, we're telling them that we're not really committed to our beliefs and that really we may be more pro-choice than we're letting on. Yep. Like, if they're not willing to do this, we get them out and we get somebody in. If you can't do your job that you said that you were going to do, it's time to find somebody new.
Time for you to go. Yep, and we're going to be talking about this in this new seminar that we're putting together. But all of these issues are interrelated. So we've gone now from the girl talking about being estranged from her family to the issue over partial birth abortion to this issue of what we ask politicians, and it's all the same issue. It's all related to the same thing. What do you believe about the unborn child? That is the central issue. It
also affects, if you have no regard for the unborn child, what other groups do you not have regard for?
Yeah.
And as we've talked about and shown on this episode, abortion has impacts on other aspects of our country, such as the economy and immigration.
Right.
We've proven that numerous times on this show. It affects healthcare, or the standards that the medical community calls healthcare.
Right.
I mean, you just go down the list and it's there.
Well, I think when you first came to work here, one of the first things I told you is that you're going to be shocked to find out that what I'm saying is not crazy.
Yeah, I thought you were a little nutty. But to be fair, I still think you're a little nutty.
Well, I probably am. You spent 40 years in the pro-life movement. See how tightly wrapped you are. But the fact is that it affects every aspect of our lives. Every single aspect.
And for women, it affects how our country view women, how we view pregnancy. Like I say, it goes on down the list.
Yeah, there is no way to do this and not think it's going to affect every aspect of your culture. And it does.
Yeah.
And everybody's complaining and lamenting the division in America.
Yeah.
that we've got these broad divisions. We don't have the situation anymore where people can disagree with each other and then go out to dinner and have a nice time or live next door to each other.
It's very hard to have those relationships still. I still have friends who have very different opinions than me on a number of things, but it's become a lot harder. And sometimes you're like, do I even bring up the topics of politics? Do I just try and keep it buried? And it's hard sometimes just because of what's going on.
I had to come to the point where I just had to admit to it myself, and I still do. I don't have any friends that are pro-aborts. I don't want any friends that are pro-aborts. And that's where everybody is now. If you have people out here that say, I found out my sister voted for Donald Trump, I don't even want to talk to her anymore. You see this sort of thing all the time. And what I'm telling you is that revolves around a lot of issues. It revolves around Donald Trump. It revolves around immigration. It revolves around guns and all kinds of issues. But when you start peeling back the layers of the onion, at the core, you'll always find abortion. Abortion was the thing that started this division in American society. It started January 22nd, 1973. That's where this division started. Anyway. Well,
thank you for sending in your question, Alex. And if there is a listener out there who has a question that you'd like answered on the podcast, you can always send it to lifedynamics.com/podcast. There's a form right there on the page. We like to discuss your questions on the show and answer them if we can.
Yep. And you don't have to have a question. If you just say, I don't have a question about this issue, but I'd like to see you discuss it.
I discuss this issue here. Yeah.
Right. Discuss this, whatever this might be. But anyway, we're out of time. We will see you next Thursday. Until then, remember, we're not here to put up a good fight.
We're here to win.
Because winning is how the killing stops. We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.